Welcome to Module 11, Infancy and Childhood. This module will begin our first entry into the area of developmental psychology. Module 11.1. Maturation is defined as the biological growth processes that enable orderly changes in behavior. It is relatively uninfluenced by experience, which means that we will grow as humans regardless of the experiences we have. If we have severe deprivation or abuse, it can slow our development, yet the genetic growth patterns are inborn. Maturation, or nature, sets the course of our development, while experience, or nurture, adjusts it. Nature and nurture both interact throughout our development. 11-1. During infancy and childhood, how do the brain and motor skills develop? Brain cells are sculpted by heredity and experience. During birth, we have a growth spurt of our neural networks. Ages 3 to 6, rapid frontal lobe growth and continued growth into adolescence continues. Early childhood is what's called a critical period for some skills, for example, language and vision. Tens of billions of synapses form and organize and reorganize, while a use it or lose it pruning process shuts down unused links. Throughout life, learning changes our brain tissue, and this is often called neuroplasticity. From these three pictures, we can see the rapid change in neural growth in a very short period of time, from newborn to 3 months to 15 months, and then during this process, around 15 months, we will begin the neural pruning process where some of these neural connections will be shunted. The critical period is an optimal period early in the life of an organism when exposure to certain stimuli or experiences produce normal development. Lacking exposure experience results in abnormal development, and the brain's amazing plasticity reorganizes brain tissues in response to new experiences. So in this early critical period, especially if a child is deprived of sensory experiences, opportunities for reading and engaging with others, then they may not proceed normally. So for instance, if a child is kept by themselves and does not interact with others socially, they may not develop social skills as quickly or at the same pace as other children their age. So as an example of what deprivation can do to impede development, we have two different experiments. We have a mouse on the left, which is in an impoverished environment. As you can see, the mouse is in solitude. It has a water bottle, but it doesn't really have any activities. There's nothing it can play with, or really it's just an empty cage. And we look at the brain cell from that rat, and we see that the rat actually has not developed a neuron as much as it could if it were in an enriched environment. And you can see the main line up and down vertically is the axon, and you have spreading out from that would be terminal dendrites and terminal branches, and you can see they're not very well developed. It doesn't really look, much like a well-developed tree, so to speak. On the right side, we have an enriched environment. We have multiple rats in the same cage. We have a second level where they can go up and down a ramp. It looks like there's a climbing toy and some other type of activity in the corner. But in this case, the rats get to interact socially, where in the impoverished environment, the rat is in solitude. And if you look at the enriched rat brain cell, we can see there are many more branches coming off the main axon. And then from the terminal body, and you can see that it's quite more developed compared to the impoverished rat. So a developing brain, it enables our physical coordination. As nervous system and muscles mature, our skills emerge. It's mostly universal in sequence, but not in timing. Guided by genes and influenced by environment is probably the most important part of this. The recommended infant back-to-sleep position, putting babies to sleep on their backs, to reduce the risk of a smothering crib death, has been associated with somewhat later crawling, but not with later walking. Physical development, brain maturation, and infant memory. Infants are capable of learning and remembering. Waning of infantile amnesia by age 7 or so may reflect the brain's increasing capability of conscious memory. Now, children before age 7, and especially early on, don't really have the cognitive ability to filter out the stimuli they're exposed to, and as such, they do not form long-term memories, at least not an extensive amount of long-term memories, because it would just be overload, because we're just taking in so much sensory input, and they really can't process it. We call that infantile amnesia, and that sort of disappears around age 7, where the brain has a little more cognitive power. We can filter out some stimuli and organize it better, and they actually start to create more conscious memories. The baby's only 3 months old can learn that kicking moves them mobile, and that they can retain from learning, and they can retain that learning for a month. Module 11.2. From the perspectives of Piaget, Vygotsky, and today's researchers, how does a child's mind develop? The French psychologist Jean Piaget was a pioneering developmental psychologist who studied children's cognitive development. Children are active thinkers. Their minds develop through a series of universal, irreversible stages, from simple reflexes to adult abstract reasoning. While the children are developing and their brains are maturing, they build schemas, and these are concepts or frameworks that organize and interpret the information they're exposed to. And the schemas are used and adjusted through assimilation. They interpret new experiences in terms of existing understandings. And accommodation, they adapt their current understandings or schemas to incorporate new information. And I think what's interesting about Piaget's work is that he developed this theory through the process of naturalistic observation. If you watch a video with Piaget, you will hear him clearly say he was not an empiricist. He did not test things out, so to speak. He actually just observed how children interacted in their natural environment. In Piaget's view, cognitive development consists of 4 major stages: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. The sensory motor stage is from birth to nearly 2 years of age. Infants know the world mostly in terms of their sensory impressions and their motor activities. Infants lack object permanence. They are not aware that things continue to exist even when they are not perceived. This is mastered around 8 months of age, when the infants begin exhibiting memory for things they no longer see. So you see in these pictures, this young child has looks like stuffed sheep. They cover it with a cloth, and now they think that the object is gone, and they remove the cloth, and you see the child is happy to see that the object is still there. In pre-operational stage, from about 2 to 6 or 7 years, a child learns to use language but cannot yet perform the mental operations of concrete logic. The principle of conservation, which Piaget believed to be a part of concrete operational reasoning, is that properties such as mass, volume, and number remain the same despite changes in the forms of objects. Children at this age tend to engage in pretend play, and they also have a strong tendency toward egocentrism. They have difficulty perceiving things from another's point of view. Even as adults, we may overestimate the extent to which our perspectives are shared by others. This is often called the curse of knowledge. So in this slide, we see the concept of conservation. We have the young girl sitting there with 2 glass containers, both with, looks like, milk. And on the first slide, your first picture, you see they both have the same amount. On the next picture, the milk has been transferred into a taller container, but a little more narrow, has a narrower diameter. When the child is asked which one has more, the child doesn't understand that even though it's taller, only its shape has changed and the amount of liquid is still the same, but the child points to the fact that the taller one has more milk. This pre-operational child does not yet understand the principle of conservation. When the milk is poured into a tall, narrow glass, it suddenly seems like more than it was in the shorter, wider glass. In another year or so, she'll understand that the amount stays the same despite the change in shape of the container. Theory of mind involves the ability to read the mental state of others. Between ages 3 and 4.5, children worldwide use theory of mind to realize others may hold false beliefs. By age 4 to 5, children anticipate false beliefs of friends. Children with autism spectrum disorder have difficulty understanding that another's state of mind differs from their own. The concrete operational stage lasts from about 7 to 11 years of age. Children gain the mental operations that enable them to think logically about concrete events. They begin to understand that a change in form does not mean a change in quantity, and become able to understand simple math and conservation. The last stage is formal operational stage, and this lasts from about age 12 through adulthood. Children are no longer limited to concrete reasoning based on actual experience. They're able to think abstractly. Cognitive development, an alternative viewpoint, Lev Vygotsky and the social child. Piaget emphasized that the children's minds grow through interaction with the physical environment, but Vygotsky focused on how the child's mind grows through interaction with the social environment. By age 7, children are able to think and solve problems with words. By mentoring children, parents and others provide a temporary scaffold to facilitate a child's higher level of thinking. Language, an important ingredient of social mentoring, provides the building blocks for thinking. Reflecting on Piaget's theory, Piaget identified significant cognitive milestones and stimulated global interest in cognitive development. The research findings suggest that the sequence of cognitive milestones unfold basically as Piaget proposed. Development is more continuous than Piaget theorized, and children may be more competent than Piaget's theory revealed. And what that means is Piaget has been criticized for underestimating the ages at which the change or the transition between stages occurs. It may occur earlier for some children, and therefore they are more competent than other children. Autism spectrum disorder, 11-3. What is autism spectrum disorder? It is a disorder that appears in childhood and is marked by significant deficiencies in communication and social interaction, and by rigidly fixated interests and repetitive behaviors. Children with ASD have impaired theory of mind. Reading faces and social signals is challenging for those with ASD. The underlying source of ASD symptoms seem to be poor communication among brain regions that normally work together to let us take another's viewpoint. Autism spectrum disorder's biological factors include genetic influences, abnormal brain development, prenatal maternal infection, inflammation, psychiatric drug use, or stress hormones. It has been shown that the childhood MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines do not lead to ASD. The prevalence of ASD. Approximately there are 4 boys for every girl that are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. The risk is greater when there are higher levels of prenatal testosterone. Simon Baron-Cohen suggests ASD represents an extreme male brain. It's higher when identical co-twins have ASD, and younger siblings of those with ASD, the sibling also is at heightened risk. Random genetic mutations in sperm-producing cells may also play a role. Over 40 fathers have much higher risk fathering a child with ASD than do men that are under the age of 30. Module 11.3 Social Development. 11-4 How do parent-infant attachment bonds form? Attachment is the emotional tie with another person. It's shown in young children by their seeking closeness to the caregiver and showing distress on separation. At about 8 months, soon after object permanence develops, children separated from their caregivers display stranger anxiety. Infants form attachments not simply because parents gratify biological needs, but more importantly because they are comfortable, familiar, and responsive. Social development and human bonding. Body contact. Infant monkeys use cloth mothers as secure base to explore and as a safe haven when distressed. Similar to human infants, who also become attached to parents who are soft and warm, much parent-infant communication occurs via touch. Familiarity. During the critical period, and that was discussed earlier, this optimal period early in the life of an organism exists when exposure to certain stimuli or experiences produces normal development. Early on, infants, animals, and humans go through imprinting, which is a process by which certain animals form strong attachments during early life. Social development and attachment differences. 11-5 How have psychologists studied attachment differences and what have they learned? Mary Ainsworth designed the strange situation experiments, which show that some children are securely attached and others are insecurely attached. Infants' differing attachment styles reflect both their individual temperament and the responsiveness of their parents and child care providers. Early attachment has an impact on later adult relationships. and comfort with affection and intimacy. Adult relationships seem to reflect the attachment styles of early childhood, lending support to Erik Erikson's idea that basic trust is formed in infancy by our experiences with responsive caregivers. Temperament and attachment. Temperament is a person's characteristic emotional reactivity and intensity. It also should be noted that temperament is a personality characteristic, and it is believed to remain stable over time, yet during the critical period there could be great influence on how a person's temperament develops. A difficult person is irritable, intense, and unpredictable. An easy person or easygoing is cheerful, relaxed, and feeding and sleeping on predictable schedules. We know that in the U.S. especially there is a larger percentage of single-family households. There has been in the past. And now we find children that are now going through dual parenting, which means they may be parented one way with a mother, and when they're visiting with their father, the parenting may be different. This chart from the book discusses some of the challenging facts about declining father care, as well as some encouraging findings. And I think that because of this trend towards, unfortunately, more single-family, single-parent households, in dual parenting, there's been more research on the role of parenting, especially fathers, on the role of development with children, including that with daughters, which has not been an area of research, and how the father-daughter relationship actually aids in the daughter's development. Attachment styles and later relationships. Basic trust develops in securely attached children. Basic trust, a sense that the world is predictable and trustworthy, is said to be formed during infancy by appropriate experiences with responsive caregivers. This is Erik Erikson, who was alive between 1902 and 1994. The insecure, anxious attachment, people constantly crave acceptance but remain alert to signs of rejection. The insecure, avoidant attachment, people experience discomfort getting close to others and use avoidance strategies to maintain distance from others. So what happens when we're deprived of attachment? 11-6. How does childhood neglect or abuse affect children's attachments? Most children who are growing up in adversity or experiencing abuse are pretty resilient, withstanding trauma and becoming well-adjusted adults. Those who are severely neglected by their parents or otherwise prevented from forming attachments at an early age may be a risk for attachment problems. And here is an example from the 1980s in Romania about the deprivation of attachment. In this orphanage, 250 children between ages 1 and 5 outnumbered the caregivers 15-1. When these children were tested after Romania's dictator was executed, they had lower intelligence scores and double the 20% rate of anxiety symptoms found in children assigned to quality foster care settings. You can see, because of the ratio of caregivers to children, the children did not form attachments because they did not spend enough quality time or have attention by the caregiver. Parenting styles. 11-7. What are the 3 parenting styles and how do children's traits relate to them? Parenting styles reflect varying degrees of control. This was researched by Diana Baumrind, where she established 3 basic parenting styles. Authoritative parents are warmly concerned and confrontive and tend to have children with the highest self-esteem, self-reliance, and social competence. Permissive parents are unrestraining and tend to have children who are more aggressive and immature. Authoritarian parents are coercive and tend to have children with less social skills and self-esteem. So if we look at them, the authoritative parenting style represents a balance between warmth as well as providing some level of discipline and guidance to the child. Permissive parents are the ones that would let pretty much the children do what they would like and do not give them boundaries or guidelines to operate in. And authoritarian parents probably overuse boundaries and guidance and are seen as the disciplinarian. So how do parenting styles, culture interact to impact how we raise children? We know cultures vary, their values vary from place to place and from one time to another within the same place. That is, there are different subgroups within cultures that may have different perspectives even though they're part of a larger culture. Children have survived and flourished throughout history under various child-raising systems, and the diversity in child raising should be a reminder that no single culture has the only way to raise children successfully. That brings us to the end of Module 11, and we hope you've enjoyed reading about how infancy and childhood development occurs both from a cognitive and social level. And in the next module, Module 12, we will actually move into adolescence and look at the different stages of development that occur there.